So in these three next slides, I'm going to go deep into each of these three purposes. I'm going to give you some tips of how you can achieve these three objectives. So the first one is to guide the reader, and that's very difficult. It's very difficult sometimes to guide the reader because you don't know what you're talking about, or you don't know what do you want to show, or you don't know anything. So it's sometimes difficult. That's why I say today you are going to write and you will do an activity, and even in the homework you will keep on writing and you will come up with something. But that doesn't have to be that it's going to be the last version of that. You're going to improve that all over again. Maybe you'll read something later on that you can put in there, or maybe you change your mind about something and you can fix it. So it's about that. It's a process that it takes time to be completed. So usually when you write the literature review, you have this structure. Like first you write a really broad introduction, like in one paragraph you write, you basically say this is what I'm going to talk about, but in theoretical terms. Like I'm going to talk about how restaurants change from a very traditional approach of just selling physically to now including apps and other things to sell during these pandemic times. So mm, that's more or less theoretical, but you have to be even more conceptual, more theoretical, so you can describe that as this paper talks about organizational transformation in terms of digitalization, or organizational transformation as a consequence of intense investment in technology. Maybe it's something like that, but you need to define. That's why I say it's difficult, because you need to define what you want to talk about. It's not the same as saying in implementing the use of apps as saying intensive investment in technology. It's quite different, and you will use different sources. You will use different books, different papers, different authors. So you have to choose one, and you need to stick with that. So maybe you will need some time to discuss what you are going to talk about to write this introduction. Sometimes introductions are wrote at the end. So maybe you will start on other things and then continue with it. Then another thing that I suggest is that you use subsections. Like the main section is in literature review, so it's introduction and then literature review. But you can use subsections. So one subsection can be a main concept that you want to talk about, like maybe digital transformation or investment in technology, or maybe software implementation, or maybe I don't know. It can have different names, so don't worry about that much. Right, let's go with software implementation. So first subsection is software implementation. So software implementation, what is software implementation? So you need to define what is a software implementation. Is it a matter of only acquiring the software? Is there training involved in that? Who defined that previously? So write that in a paragraph, and then maybe a second paragraph about arguing with that definition. Why is that problematic? What is that definition problematic at some point? Like, what can you add to that discussion? Um, so I will show you a paper when I try to do this, and I will give you an example, so you can more or less get some like an idea of how can you do this. But the main thing is that you use subsections, probably 2 or 3, to define your concepts. So if software implementation, maybe it's important, or a structure or organizational structure might be another one. So you use another subsection with 2 or 3 paragraphs where you define what is that. And also, apart from saying what is in there, also illustrate your reader with a few papers that talk about that. So maybe software implementation. Software implementation, it's not only about technology, it's also about training and, I don't know, training and uh, even convincing people to use that. It's not as simple as that. And that definition doesn't come from your mind. It's a definition that it's already written somewhere else. So you cite the sources from that. I will show you about this, how you can find references. So that's the main thing, right? Like the first paragraph, this is a software implementation. It's not only technology, it's not only money, it's also about training and convincing people. And that definition of that definition of software implementation, it's about these things that are in the literature. Then next paragraph. The next paragraph, it's about studies about software implementation. So you can maybe mention there was another study in France about pharma company that implemented a new software, and their main issue in that paper was that people didn't want to use the software. So the main challenge was to convince people. So that's an argument from another study that you are adding to the first definition. So you are building into there, right? You want to convince the reader that it's important training and convincing people, and not only the money or the technology. So that will be the structure of these subsections. And finally, in the end of this section of the literature review, so you have the brief introduction, one paragraph, and then subsections. And then in the end, you conclude by maybe calling for an action. Like you say, like, I have reviewed these concepts, and still not clear what is the effect on organizational structure once you implement the software. So it's still not clear. That is a call for action. Or you can even set a hypothesis, one or two or three, if you are doing quantitative. So you can say, these three studies already stated or already found that convincing people, it's very important when you implement the software. So my first hypothesis is that when we implement the software, there will be more, I don't know, there will be a challenge on people or trying to convince people to do this. Or in the process of implementing a software, uh, it will be relevant to convince people, something like that. But I gave you really bad examples of hypotheses, but we can work on this in teams during the class. So that's more or less the structure. I will show you in a paper an example of that. Then the next thing is show that you are an expert. Again, I think first you have to believe in yourself, and you have to uh, accept that you will be an expert on that very narrow thing that you are going to choose. So don't worry. The first step is to believe that you are that. then once that you believe in yourself, then you are going to convince the reader by mentioning other studies. So as I said before, it's like first you define the concept, and then you add studies that build on that definition that you previously stated. So it's like, let me give you another example. Maybe about, what can I say? Let me think about the things that you are doing already, like in construction, the team that is doing construction. Like maybe, okay, so when you invest in technology in the construction industry, uh, people need to carry out more training than people in other industries, something like that. That's maybe something that another author found about construction. So you mentioned that study. Or maybe another author found that in construction it's very difficult to implement technology. And then you can add that in your discussion. In the end, you need to convince the reader that what you're arguing it's true, not only because you say it, but because there are other studies that more or less have the same thing. And also, and this is mostly in the call for action in the end, in the very last paragraph, what is wrong with those studies? Is there like, or what is missing from that? Like maybe this study about construction where they argued that training is very important, maybe it was done in a developed country or maybe in a rich country. And so maybe you ask, is this the same in countries with less technology, with less capital, like developing countries such as Mexico? So that can be a fair question. That can be a deficiency of the study or not, or a limitation from the study. And finally, again, in the call for action, you more or less answer to this question: where do I situate my study? Uh, if you are going to situate your study around the papers that you are citing, the references that you are using. So if you are using references from this guy and this guy and this guy, you want to be somewhere in there. You want to join that conversation. So this question is more or less answered by itself. In the literature review, it has to be clear that you are right into this conversation. this conversation from all of these papers that you will use in your literature review. And finally, define the important concepts. Again, I think this is very obvious, but uh, a tip in here is you should acknowledge that there are different definitions, because that's mostly what happens in social science. Like, there is not a universal definition for costs. There are different definitions of costs. It can be labor cost, it can be economic cost, it can be moral cost. There are different costs, right? So which one are you going to use? Is it economic cost? It's okay. Or is it a moral cost? Or is it opportunity cost? What kind of cost it is, right? So it's the same. Is it digital transformation in terms of culture, in terms of technology, in terms of what? And then from all of that, just choose the definition that you want. And I am not asking you to give me all the definitions about digital transformation. Just acknowledge that there are others. Just say, like, there are different definitions about digital transformation, such as the ones that focus on technology or the ones that focus on investment, but we focus more on culture, or we focus more on politics, or we focus more on the organization. And then use that one, keep that one, write in that paragraph the definition that you find from the other papers, and then close that paragraph, and then start giving examples from other studies. Usually, that's what I said about the subsections. Each subsection should be around 1, 2, maybe 3 max paragraphs defining that concept. So I think I will finish the video in here. In the next video, I want to show you an example of this.